to Julius. Puts up a three. And a goal!
Bearcat Blitz on network. Welcome into another show, everybody. Happy holidays to everyone celebrating, whether you're going down the Hanukkah lane, Kwanzaa, Christmas. Happy holidays to all. And we're going to send you into the holiday midweek madness on the right foot. The Bearcats basketball team entered the holiday on the right foot with a 2-0 week last week. Big weekend, getting the job done over Dayton in downtown Cincinnati. And against Northern, or not Kentucky, that was earlier this season, against
Scrambling State.
All these little sisters of the poor teams just run together in my head. Before we get to all that, though, we got the transfer portal update as well here on Bearcat Blitz, presented by Bet Online. We've got to tell you about Bet Online. It continues to be the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting. From the earliest odds to end-game live betting, Bet Online provides you with all the action and the ability to watch the games as they happen. With a large selection of odds on everything from football, the NBA, and college basketball, NHL, to UFC. Head to Bet Online today, and don't forget to use promo code BELIEVE for your welcome bonus on that first deposit. That's BLEAV. Bet Online. The game starts here. You can check us out on YouTube, Talking Cats with Russ Eltman, or on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, Google, whatever podcast feed you frequent. He is Neil Meyer of Cincinnati rival site, frontofficenews.com, and I'm Russ Eltman of Cincinnati Bearcats on SI. Neil, 2-0 week for the Bearcats. They're up to number 17 in the latest AP poll. We had some really no big injury things come out of last week. Connor Hickman dinged up his foot a little bit, and he is going to be taking a little bit of a off the court break during this week, and they're hoping to get him back in full force. It's nothing major, according to Wes Miller, for the start of conference play on Monday against Kansas State. Overall, though, Neil, 10-1 record. This is exactly where I thought the Bearcats would be entering the season. I had them going 10-1 with a loss at Villanova. And even with that loss at Villanova, Neil, I think I would have been wrong had Dan Skillings been playing in that game. I feel like he would have been the difference in that short deficit, and they might be 11-0 at this point. Things are going very well for Wes Miller's program in year 4. They have done something right now, Neil, that they have yet to do under Wes Miller, and that's basically answer every question in non-conference play.
Yeah, no, most certainly, Russ. As you mentioned, obviously the biggest thing coming out of this weekend was just that Connor Hickman was a little bit dinged up there, but overall, I mean, Russ, you look at what Wes Miller has done so far here in conference play. This is their best start since 2012, 2013, and they're sitting 10-1. So they're doing something that hasn't been accomplished in nearly going on 12 years. So that's a very big feat for Wes Miller and this Cincinnati team. But Russ, when we talked about this non-conference schedule at the beginning of the season, you and I both had them going either 11-1 or 12-0, running the table in non-conference play. However, the one loss that you and I both agreed on earlier this season was that it could come at Villanova, and nobody knew what to expect. And then obviously, like you mentioned, if Dan Skillings plays in that game, I think Cincinnati could be sitting at 12-0 right now, heading into conference play, or
11-0 would be 11-0.
11-0, yep, sitting into conference play. But on top of it, that's the difference maker. And I know there's been a lot of chatter on social media about, oh, well, Dayton should be ranked higher than Cincinnati. Well, Cincinnati proved that they belong higher than Dayton after their win on Saturday night, Russ. Obviously, you got to witness the experience firsthand while I had some prior obligations. Obviously, my best friend got married, so I had to rewatch the game. But, man, Cincinnati showcased a lot in that game. I know you and I talked about it off the record, but that first half versus Dayton was elite, especially on the defensive
17
side.
points allowed, and against one of the 15 best offenses efficiency-wise in the country so far, Neil, an offense that's put it on teams like UConn and some of the best in the country.
And Dayton has beat some of the best teams in the country too. They beat UConn, they beat North Carolina, they beat Marquette, or they lost to North Carolina, they beat Marquette, my bad. But still, they have played some of the best competition in all of college basketball. And Cincinnati single-handedly gave them troubles on Saturday night. And in what, Russ, you and I thought was going to be an environment where we were pleading for Bearcats fans to show up after what we saw last year. Even Wes Miller was pleading for them to show up on that neutral site. But on top of what they did Saturday night and what was a true 50-50 environment last week was phenomenal. I thought, man, Dan Skillings was fantastic in that game. 17 points again, led the Bearcats. But Russ, you and I talked about Dan Skillings' presence. If he single-handedly plays in that Villanova game, I think Cincinnati is sitting at 11-0. But right now, you got to be feeling great about what this Bearcats team and what Wes Miller is doing. And Russ, if you had to ask me what my grade was on Cincinnati's non-conference schedule, I would have to give it an A right now. Obviously, the Villanova game drew a lot of questions early on, but you beat Dayton, you beat Xavier in the final stretch there, you run the state of Ohio. Overall, that's a huge step, especially heading into Big 12 play next week versus a very poorly struggling Kansas State team on Monday night. It's going to be, things are trending in the right direction for Cincinnati, to say the least, as they take this final off week. It's worth noting that too, Russ. Final off week until the month of March. There's no more bye weeks in the season. So they need to really, that's why this resting of Connor Hickman was so important, because now they have this week left where they know they're going to be playing 2 games a week all the way up until March. So overall, if I had to give them a grade, I'd give them an A right now in non-conference play.
I like that grade. I'm going to go a little lower, A-. I think I would like the offense to be a little bit further along at this point in the season. That's where I'm going to ding them from an A to an A- and get an A+ if you go 11-0. That's kind of goes without saying if you stay perfect from the non-con. But that the offense against better teams, Neil, has been an issue. It has. They've been in the 60s in all 3 of their top 100 KenPom games when you think about Dayton, Villanova, and Xavier. And I think just the fact that offense still has a lot of room to grow. Wes Miller knows that. He said on quote on Sunday, we're coming on offense. We're going to get there. They've been one of the best offenses at points in the season, Neil, but that was before that was when their non-conference strength of schedule on KenPom was in the 300s to 330 range. Now it's gone up a lot higher due to the games over the past couple of weeks against Dayton and Xavier. And in terms of net opponent average, they are sitting at 216 right now, and their average net win is 231. Obviously, average net loss 66, being the only loss to Dayton or to Villanova. But they're 87th in scoring offense right now, 79 points per game. Their overall field goal percentage 48.7%. That's dropped from number 1 in the country a couple of weeks ago when they were rolling through those bad teams. Effective field goal percentage 51st. With the ceiling I think this team has, Neil, you'd like to see those numbers creep up towards the 30s to 20 range and start to really give the maximum amounts of runway that your defense can access you offensively. And I'd like to see them probably – you'd love to see the 3-point shot start hitting a little bit more consistently and seeing if one other guy alongside Jizzle James and Simas Lukosius can start to knock down threes consistently on this roster. Dan Skillings, it's the last thing he needs to really access a full complement of his offensive game, Neil, is that outside shot. It didn't fall against Dayton. It didn't fall against Grambling. It hasn't fallen really much at all this year. One more guy, I think, getting solid, like around 35% from the 3-point line can really, really boost this team and get them to an offensive level that they could compete for a Big 12 regular season and Big 12 tournament title. The defense is that good. It's that elite, and it's proven it so far against very good offenses this season. But the offense just still not necessarily there when you think about the best shooters on the team. CJ Frederick not getting a lot of minutes. Day Thomas still working him back. He hasn't taken a lot of 3-point shots this season. And then Simas Lukosius, kind of the most stable shooter on the roster right now. Tyler Betsy been up and down over the last few weeks. Jizzle James as well, starting to heat up a little bit, and it's finding his shot. But overall, finding that offense a little bit more, Neil, is what we're looking for in the start of conference play. And they don't have a lot more tune-up games to do it like they had on Sunday against Grambling. That was the last quad 4 game of the season, and they only have one other quad 3 game as of right now, and that's against Kansas State on March 5th at home. They're obviously in a quad 2 situation going to the number 122 net team in the country in Kansas State on Monday, December 30th. A Kansas State team that is struggling a little bit and is kind of, I would say, going to be close to a pick 'em against Cincinnati at home on Monday. I could see that being a very tight spread, 2 to 3 points between Kansas State and Cincinnati. A Kansas State team that's lost a couple key players for extended periods of time, including this game against the Cincinnati during the non-conference slates. Overall, though, Neil, 2-0. They easily win the tune-up game, 84-59. I thought that was a great sign and another great sign of how locked in this team can be going into a holiday break against the Grambling State team that I mentioned in one of our Bearcat group chats, 6-3 against the spread this season. They've held some ranked teams to very tight, kind of sweaty contests at the end where they ended up losing, but the ranked team really had to work for it. So I think that was a much better win than people realized, destroying and covering the 30-point spread against Grambling State, 84-59, and then obviously covering the couple days before against Dayton as 3.5 to 4 point favorites, getting the job done in a neutral site in a really tough environment at some points. Their shots weren't falling again, and they still found a way to get the job done. And I think, Neil, I asked this to Wes Miller on what was it? On Sunday. I was like, do you think that your team is finding different ways to win, that your team has a lot of different ways to win? He said, I don't know. As of right now, we still love to win our way, kind of is what I took from his quote. But they are finding different ways to win, in my opinion. And it's been really impressive to see how they have gelled as an overall unit and how they have been able to weather some of these terrible shooting games when earlier in the season they were hitting lights out from outside or lights out from all over the floor. Right now, Neil, they've gone 37%, 36% against Dayton, 46% against Grambling. But since the Villanova game, it's been kind of up and down offensively, and they've still found a way to stay perfect since that loss, 68-60. And a 68-60 loss, Neil, where they go 8 for 26 from 3, and it just was one of those days where things weren't falling. You get 2 or 3 more of those threes to fall, and you get closer to 30, 38, 40%. Who knows? Could be 11-0 right now and in the top 10 nationally among all teams in college basketball. Real quick, Neil, before we get to college football, transfer portal, and tie up this Christmas Eve show, Day Thomas, big news in the transfer, or not transfer portal, in the JUCO ranks. Diego Pavia's case is continuing against the NCAA. They're going to continue this in courts, but they have granted a waiver for all JUCO players to continue at least one more year of playing in college athletics. So the case was basically Diego Pavia was claiming that because he was playing in JUCO, that shouldn't count as eligibility towards his Division I status. And the courts are kind of they're hearing the case, and it's causing the waiver to pop up for the NCAA because they don't want to be caught in more cases down the line from players who would have been caught up in this had they blocked it amidst the Diego Pavia situation not being finalized. So Day Thomas is one of those players who spent 2 years in JUCO and is in his second year at the Division I level. Normally, he would be done after the season with eligibility, but Neil could be seeing Jizzle James, Keyshawn Tillery, and Day Thomas in the backcourt next year, or who knows, maybe a red shirt for Keyshawn Tillery, and you just extend that timeline another year. Overall, though, whatever happens, it's good things for the Bearcats if this news came down.
Yeah, no, most certainly. And I think another big thing that goes unnoticed in this situation with Diego Pavia, despite him starting for 3 years at the Division I level, I think this case is getting the extended look at because during the time at the JUCO level, Russ, COVID-19 happened. So that's also playing a big factor into what this case could be because some of these guys were still in school when COVID happened. So typically those guys who were in school at that Division I level had that extra year granted already. Now, despite being at the JUCO level for 2 years, then coming to the D1, they're still within that window, essentially. Well, quote unquote, technically still in that window. But overall, this is huge news for Cincinnati. If this is a thing where Day Thomas elects to come back, or if he doesn't elect to come back. But now it gives Cincinnati and Wes Miller another interesting combo to the fold because, as of right now, Connor Hickman will be out of eligibility at the end of the season. Day Thomas will now have the option to use that waiver or go test the pro waters, whatever he might do. But it definitely, if you're Wes Miller, you definitely are pretty happy with what's going on right now because, Russ, as you mentioned, the 2025 recruiting class for Cincinnati only has 2 players, Keyshawn Tillery and Sean Abayev. So on top of it, now you have that opportunity to bring a veteran guard back, especially whatever might happen. Say Jizzle James blows up and has a great end of the year and goes to the draft. You now have an experienced point guard right there in the fold, still waiting in the wings. So it's going to be interesting to see how this all plays out. But it's huge news surrounding anybody, especially these JUCO athletes. Because, Russ, if you follow college sports like we do, this is a common trend now. You're seeing guys go to this JUCO route and then make the jump to the Division I level. So this is going to be a thing where if this goes on to get a waiver down the line and get granted full-time outside of this blanket waiver, it could get real interesting for college athletics, to say the least.
No doubt. Always interesting in college athletics, and we'll pick up that interest in the college football transfer portal after this, as Cincinnati football has quieted their pace a little bit, but seemingly zeroing in on some of these last needs they need to fill out of the portal. All that coming up on Bearcat Blitz. Transfer portal update, Neil. Not a whole lot of action over the last few days, transfer portal wise. Cincinnati did add a cornerbacks coach to the fold in LSU's Eddie Hicks. I don't know if we talked about that in the.
I don't think we did. I was going to bring it up anyways.
Yeah. Well, I don't think we did. They have now filled all the spots on the coaching staff that are allotted for the salary slots, and no title for a special teams coach amidst Eddie Hicks coming in as quarterbacks coach.
Yeah, and on top of it too, Russ, you can't forget that Adam Braithwaite comes in as the team's safeties coach.
Yeah, that's right. That happened, I think, within hours.
They all happen within an hour of each other from Sanford. Yep. So overall, and it's worth noting that Adam Braithwaite, he has experience coaching special teams. So I don't know if that's the designed role, but he has a history and a past of coaching special teams.
Maybe a group. It
might be a group effort,
committee type thing.
But it's also worth noting too that Eddie Hicks started his coaching career essentially at Cincinnati in 2013 as a GA under Tommy Tuberville. So it's kind of a full circle moment for him, but he's been the defensive backs coach at LSU for the last 2 years. So that is huge. Well, as a defensive analyst for the last 2 years. So overall, Cincinnati completes their coaching staff, and a guy like Eddie Hicks, who has been around an SEC program, you kind of know what you're going to expect there. He's been all around. He's got a lot of coaching experience between Charlotte. He spent time at Charlotte. He spent times with LSU, Alcorn State. So he's been around quite a bit at Murray State as well, Austin Peay, Southern Miss. So he's got a lot of history there and a lot of experience coaching defensive backs and special teams as well. But it's also worth noting that Adam Braithwaite and Eddie Hicks spent time together at Charlotte. So that they have a history working together. So that's always pretty unique to have, especially on a new staff as well.
Solid hires, I think. I mean, how are you going to judge staff hires like this? Like, they bring good experience. I like the resumes. If you see the resume and they got good long-term experience to level themselves up into the Power 4, Power 5 and get this opportunity, happy for them. It's awesome. We'll see if they can come through. I think overall, Neil, Scott Satterfield has done a pretty nice job with his staff. And on top of that, nice job, like, for example, with Kerry Coombs. It was time to go. It was probably a good time to split. Good self-awareness there of knowing when to move on from guys and when they add pieces and keep this train as well-oiled as possible. I think the staff decisions have been the biggest strength for Scott Satterfield at UC in terms of his recruiting staff and his overall coaching staff it has been the best part of the Scott Satterfield era, and there's no reason to think that these hires are not going to continue that momentum. Speaking of momentum, we created a whole new segment right there. I should have banked that in, but just realized that we didn't talk about that amidst all the news fervor from 4 days ago in the coaching ranks. We'll get to the transfer portal after these messages on Bearcat Blitz. Neil, checking out the transfer portal slate right now. Cincinnati has added the names like Caleb Goody, Noah Jennings, Cyrus Allen, Jeff Caldwell, Noah Latalipe, Tarantayo, Matthew McDoom, and Jalen White McLean. So far, have not had any major additions in the last few days. There is obviously still some names out there on the board that Cincinnati could go after, and roughly have offered publicly around 34 guys so far. About half of them have already made commitments elsewhere, and another few have committed to Cincinnati in succession. Edge rusher, I think, probably the top need as of right now. Just one more edge rusher to make you confident in the trajectory of that defensive end group, and possibly, another tight end. I think a guy to replace Francis Sherman, a guy that can hopefully give you a much more solid blocking acumen, down to down, snap to snap, not necessarily going to be a weapon in the pass game, but can really be that extra key unlocking piece in those outside runs and in the pass blocking game to protect Brendan Sorsby. Those are the two biggest issues I'm looking at right now in terms of just overall holes left on the roster. Safety as well. Although Logan Wilson, Trey Gola-Callard, you're feeling pretty solid there at the starting position. It's really about depth. And I would say, for the most part, every one of these spots is about depth, except for defensive end. I think you could still stand to spend a little bit extra resources NIL-wise trying to get a guy that could possibly pop for you on the outside, because it's such an important position, and we don't necessarily know that there is going to be a game changer or even a game kind of alterer at that position right now with how murky it is.
Yeah, no, most certainly. And I mean, you look at what Trey Gola-Callard was able to do last year, especially in the back half of the season, Russ. That was the guy you mentioned.
He played really well in the last 6 weeks.
Really well in the last 6 games. And then on top of it, Logan Wilson did as well. So they're feeling pretty confident back there. But as you mentioned, they're probably going to go after a tight end there to fill Francis Sherman. But it's going to be interesting to see what they do here in the portal, because they've done a great job right now. But it's still going to be interesting to see, do they go get a tight end? Do they go get another defensive end? It's still worth noting to see what they'll do in the final month of the transfer portal. Obviously, it's closed until the first week of January, but it's going to be interesting to see what they do here in the upcoming weeks.
Right. I think it's open for everybody to enter until the 28th or 29th, right, Neil? Something like that. And then you can still contact and to take visits, all that stuff, but you can't get into the transfer portal unless you do so in the next 4 to 5 days. So that's a big key right there. And talk about Trey Gola-Callard. He was solid down the stretch of the season, played much better compared to how he was very up and down in the first 4 weeks, first 5 games of the season. So I think they're pretty solid at safety, and there's room for growth from that position. Overall, though, Neil, as we kind of wind down the show here, I like what they've done in the transfer portal. I think they've met the needs correctly. They've kind of stepped back, not necessarily gone too overzealous. And I think we're seeing a reserved and measured approach in the second year in the transfer portal. And on top of that, Neil, there has not been a mass exodus of any sorts. I mean, of the 16 outgoing transfers, we can close on this, you're looking at like Brady Drogosh, for example. He transfers out to Grand Valley State, and I'm sure he's going there to play quarterback. But yeah, it was never going to happen in Cincinnati at the linebacker position. Caleb Schmitz, tight ends. You're trying to replace a guy like Caleb Schmitz, elevate that position. He goes to Illinois State. So I mean, outside of really Jordan Young, who is going to Arkansas. Outside of him, Neil, there aren't really any major losses on this slate. Cameron Wilson, you probably would have liked to keep around as a depth piece on the outside of that edge rushing unit. And Tyron Smith, you probably would have liked to keep him around. But
Sterling Burkhalter could have been a big player, but
but you look at the 4 receivers they added. I'd take those 4 guys over Tyron Smith and Sterling Burkhalter.
And then you lose Kalen Carroll as well, and he's still out there feeling interest from other schools. So I saw West Virginia was interested in him, but it's been a kind of real quiet recruitment. No one really knows where Kalen Carroll's hearing from or whatnot, but Sterling Burkhalter is receiving a lot of offers. It's just one step lower. I think he was drawing a little bit of interest from Arkansas, but overall, he's drawing some AAC offers, a lot of offers from about the one step down where Cincinnati was good at playing at a few years ago. But it's not like he's out there receiving these Big 12 offers or anything like that still to date. But he's gaining a lot of interest for sure.
Right, and they will add probably 1 or 2 more guys, I would imagine. At least one guy in the spring window, which is what happened last year when they brought in – I know they brought in Jordan Robinson. Was there another guy they brought in the spring window? I can't exactly remember. But Robinson,
Jordan Robinson, and then 2 years ago, they brought in Xavier Henderson and Jordan Young in the spring portal.
Right, and think about the impact those guys have had. I mean, Jordan Young and Xavier Henderson were 2 of the key players over the last 2 seasons. Jordan Young was their best cover man in 2024. And Jordan Robinson, Neil, what a performance in his first year in Cincinnati. I mean, blew away all the metrics he had posted at Kentucky the prior 2 seasons. 76.4 PFF grade on 228 total snaps. I think he was like close to the top ranked defensive player on the entire team, according to PFF. Jordan Robinson was. Yeah, he was number 4 in overall PFF grade on the season, to go with right up there with 3 other transfers, and Jake Golday, Derek Canteen at 2 and 3, and right behind Antoine Peak Jr. at number 1. So they have done a good job of recognizing where their final kind of issues are and going after those players. They may not have the arsenal of Ohio State, but I think so far, with the confinements of the NIL package they are working with compared to all of the other major players in the power conference level, they've done a pretty nice job. And we'll take an assessment overall at the kind of national rankings or transfer portal wise when we reconvene on Friday. We'll probably be going more of a Tuesday, Friday setup for the basketball season, as there's going to be some Monday basketball games that we don't want to talk about 12 hours before. We'd rather talk about 12 hours later and recap right here on the show. Bearcat Blitz, presented by Bet Online. For Neil Meyer, I'm Russ Heltman. This has been Bearcat Blitz right here on the Believe Network. Have a great, great holiday, everybody.
This is the second. 15 seconds left. Shot clock off. 4-point game. DeJulius puts up a 3.